Rukia Kuchiki is the first character Kubo created for Bleach, the first character we see at the beginning of the story, one of two namesakes of the manga, the death to Ichigo's strawberry, the rotator of his life who flipped his world upside down and granted his wishes of power, delivering upon his yearnings for strength by imparting her spiritual energy onto him, in essence sharing her soul with him and subsequently allowing him to save his family, a heart formed between two strangers worlds apart. But despite existing in entirely separate dimensions, these two individuals are suffering from very similar circumstances. Grief over the death of a loved one which has evolved into guilt pointed inwards, as well as an identity crisis. Rukia's significance to the overarching story of Bleach is clear enough, as the one to have physically set it in motion, paving the way for the substitute Shinigami in our main protagonist. Beyond that, she has her own dynamic character journey paired with multiple interesting dynamics that consistently develop over the course of the story. That is, until they finally reach their pinnacle alongside her spiritual transformation, the White Haze, Rukia's Bankai against the personification of fear itself. The single most recurring obstacle in the journeys of both namesakes of the story manifests into a seemingly insurmountable enemy. But through courage, Rukia overcomes and reaches her character's natural conclusion. But what is this natural conclusion? To understand the end, we must start at the beginning. Rukia was abandoned as an infant by the only person in her life, her older sister Hisana. Left isolated in the outermost districts of the Rokongai, she formed bonds with others suffering from similar circumstances in the slums of Seoul society, and through her naturally charismatic disposition, she became the center of this newly formed surrogate family. Things were good before the harsh reality for those subjected to life in the outermost districts of the Rokongai came crashing down, tearing this family apart. Only Rukia and Renji survived, the only two with strong spiritual power. They do not belong in the Rokongai because of this power, and together they promise to become Shinigami to escape the slums that took their loved ones. Naturally, they were accepted into the Shinigami Academy and quickly rose through the ranks thanks to their talent. But, once again, Rukia struggled to fit in because of her average Kido and less than average swordsmanship. Still, it's better than being in those slums. And just as things seem to be turning out for the better, once again, disaster strikes. The last remaining bond she had in her life, the heart formed between her and Renji, was broken by the nobility of the Kuchiki clan. The aristocrats proposed that Rukia will be adopted into their family and subsequently graduate from the academy, joining the Gotei 13. Rukia isn't happy about this, but before she can profess her feelings and just general dissent with the proposal, Renji intervenes and congratulates her on the achievement. Rukia sees through this facade and understands exactly what it means. Renji is simply looking out for her. Her feelings hold no weight. In the Soul Society, you simply do not refuse the request of a noble family. Renji knew this well, and prevented her from verbalizing her gloom with regards to the proposal, and thus the rift between them is formed and Rukia is returned to isolation once more. The Kuchiki family are characterized by white, best seen through the wordplay present in each of their names. Ginrei's name means silvery peaks, Sojun's means pale and pure, and his Zanpakuto means white spirit. Rukia's new older brother, Byakuya's name, means white knight. This explicit association of the clan with whiteness feeds into the purity they are defined by. They place extreme importance on law and order, which is emphasized time and time again by Byakuya himself, the current head of the family. As one would expect, this trend is not present in the new edition of the family. Rukia's name has no kanji. It is simply spelled phonetically or using katakana. Kubo uses this approach when naming characters who struggle with their identity, such as Gin, Yachiru, and Zaraki. The lack of any actual meaning to Rukia's name sets her apart from the rest of the family and renders her a blank state, an empty being who lacks any any real identity. Seeing as Byakuya was the one who invited Rukia to join his family, she thought that perhaps she could bond with him. She couldn't have been more wrong. Byakuya was cold, distant. Never once did he treat her like an active part of his life, let alone a younger sister. But to have been adopted into nobility and recruited into the Gotei 13 was not completely devastating. Rukia was assigned to the 13th Division and left in the care of Captain Ukitake alongside his assistant captain Kaien Shiba, a man who treated Rukia with respect from the very beginning. Never once did he impart significance upon her status as an aristocrat, treating her just as he would any other subordinate. Once more, Rukia finds kinship, a bond that frees her from her loneliness and gives her some semblance of an identity. Not just a member of the Kuchiki clan, but Rukia, the individual. Through sharing his philosophy of the heart, Rukia learns what it means to have an emotional bond. Kaien puts words to the feelings Rukia has always had, the perpetual cycle of struggling with loneliness and finding comfort in kinship. Of course, this is a cycle, which by definition suggests circulation, from loneliness to friendship, to loneliness to friendship, to loneliness once again. The death of Kaien Shiba returns Rukia to that state of isolation, with each spin of the cycle carrying the weight of all previous spins and causing even deeper damage to her psyche. Within Kaien's words lie a nugget of wisdom that would one day free Rukia of her suffering, but for now, they remain obscured by the negativity that plagues her mind. At this point, Rukia has completely resigned to what is expected of her. Chapter 0 displays this best, showcasing Rukia's frame of mind a matter of moments before the events of Chapter 1. Byakuya shows no care for her, so she hesitates to bother him with matters she thinks would be too trivial for his attention. She is assigned to a mission in the world of the living, so she traverses between the realms in accordance with the orders given onto her, but her face of apathy says it all. This is her first solo mission, what should be a great accomplishment, and Rukia couldn't look more disillusioned. The grief she feels due to Kaien's death, the loneliness she feels due to a lack of any real bond, the feeling that she doesn't belong anywhere. These things follow and torture Rukia at the start of the story, as she delivers a monologue that encapsulates her subservience. If fate is a millstone, we are the ones who make it turn. We believe that the crushing wheel is guided by an infallible power. The Shinigami Creed indoctrinated into all members of the Gotei 13, the balancers of the universe. We is the key word. Rukia exists within systems she does not have a sense of belonging with. She is a member of the Kuchiki, but is treated as an outsider. She is a Shinigami, but she became one to escape the Rukongai and lacks any individual desire to be a Shinigami. She simply does what is expected of her, like a cog in a machine. Everything preceding the first chapter, chronologically speaking, serves to establish Rukia as a woman on the path to individualism with two main struggles, the first being her grief regarding Kaien's death, and the second being her poor relationship with Byakuya. The skeleton has been built to take Rukia on a journey of self-discovery, to find a place of belonging and in turn gain her own sense of identity. The cycle spins once more as she finds yet another heart in kinship with Ichigo. The Hogyoku placed within her feeds off Rukia's disillusioned mind frame, granting her desire to no longer be a Shinigami and subsequently transferring all of her powers over to Ichigo. But ironically, this desire to die out of grief and loneliness is the final time the cycle of Rukia's suffering will turn, as the one she is acquainted with exists to break that very cycle. She will never feel lonely again, not even when facing certain death. Through his unshakable resolve, Ichigo alters the systems Rukia has always felt trapped within, swaying them to reform in a way that does allow for Rukia to feel that sense of belonging within these systems. He overcomes Byakuya, who at this stage in the story functions as the personification of Soul Society's crippling conformism. And by overcoming his blade, Ichigo forces Byakuya to reevaluate his ideology. As the head of the Kuchiki, Byakuya's outlook is that of problematic purity. He views things incredibly simplistically. As a role model of all Shinigami, he must uphold the law because if he doesn't, who will? At this point, Byakuya is an authoritarian in the purest sense. But Ichigo's ferocity in fighting against the law itself caused fundamental changes within the Soul Society that necessitated a shift in Byakuya's perspective. Stuck between two conflicting oaths to the dead, Ichigo's actions free Byakuya from his own cycle of suffering and grant him the ability to express himself freely. Now Byakuya can fight to honor both of those oaths simultaneously, as they are no longer opposed. For his first ever gesture as an older brother, he risks his own life to protect Rukia. The broken relationships between Rukia, Byakuya and Renji have been repaired, and thus Rukia's journey of seeking individualism truly begins. Finally given the gift of choice, Rukia decides to stay in the Soul Society. Her will to live has been reinstated. The systems that once shackled her are beginning to transform. She is slowly but surely gaining her own identity. In the Arrancar saga, Rukia's newfound will to live is put to the test. Kai Shiba has returned to haunt the one who killed him. The grief coupled with guilt regarding that rainy day so long ago was never resolved. Rukia simply buried those feelings in an attempt to escape them. But this is Bleach, a story that advocates for the path to enlightenment, to gain a formless strength and wholly embrace yourself. Simply forgetting things isn't going to work. You must confront your deepest, darkest fears and overcome them, which is exactly what she manages to do, with extreme difficulty. At first, convinced the man in front of her is actually Kaien, she accepts death if that would bring him peace. She still considers herself to blame for his passing, despite the circumstances. But Aroniero's next words expose his falsehood, as he makes a request that mocks everything Kaien stood for. Rukia's Zanpakuto, Sode no Shirayuki, has a recurring circular motif. The release command of this Zanpakuto is Mae, which refers to a very specific form of dance in Japanese tradition. Mae is characterized by small circular movements while keeping the body low to the ground, one of two forms of kagura, which is a ritual of appeasement to the Shinto gods. Rukia twirls her sword in a circular motion as she utters the release command. On top of this, the imagery of a circle can be found in many of her abilities. This recurring motif represents the bubble Rukia has placed herself within. It is representative of her subservience to the system she exists within. When pushed to the brink, within an inch of her life, Rukia uses a new ability that abandons the aforementioned circle motif, Shirafune, or White Sword. This is only when she recalls Kaien's words of kinship, which affirm her sense of belonging with her newfound friends, which free her of the guilt she has always felt towards his death. The key to overcoming her trauma existed in a long-forgotten lesson she received from the subject of her grief. And now she's finally free of that grief that has been there for so many years. By breaking away from the circle motif that characterized her Zanpakuto, the extension of her soul, Kubo demonstrates Rukia's growth and progression on her journey of individualism. In the time skip following the Arrancar saga, Rukia dedicates a lot of time to devising a way for Ichigo to regain his powers. The one to originally set the gears of Ichigo's journey in motion does so once more, stabbing him through the chest again and transferring her spiritual power onto him. But this time, there's no Hogyoku. This time, there's no crime. The system has changed at its very core thanks to Ichigo's steadfastness, and Rukia is the one to verbalize this as the one most affected by those changes. Finally, we arrive at the 1000-Year Blood War, an arc almost entirely dedicated to the concept of self-actualization, with various characters reaching the conclusion of their journeys by facing off against their greatest enemies and affirming their identities. In the case of Rukia, it is fear itself that stands as her obstacle, the same fear who scraped out Byakuya's entire stomach. Utilizing the true nature of her Zanpakuto, Rukia is able to lower her body temperature to an astonishing absolute zero, effectively simulating a state of death and in turn providing immunity to Ashnod's abilities which seep through the skin. In a way, Rukia literally becomes the death she has always symbolically represented in the greater context of the story. The true nature of Sode no Shirayuki is chock full of character implications. Rukia no longer calls out a release command when activating her Zanpakuto. This is not just an indication that she has achieved Bankai, but also a representation of her enlightenment. She no longer twirls the sword in a circular motion. She no longer uses her old Shikai abilities with the associated circle motif. She has overcome the bubble she placed herself within. But this enemy that stands before her managed to push her older brother within an inch of his life. He is no joke. Ashnod activates his Vollständig, which circumvents Rukia's immunity of his ability and manages to instill fear within her. And what is it that Rukia fears? For the cycle to turn once more, to return to loneliness and isolation, for her friends to be taken from her. Jeremy Bentham was an English philosopher of the 18th century who many regard as the founder of modern utilitarianism. He devised a prison design known as the Panopticon, a circular building with a control tower placed in the center. A single guard can watch over all the cells in the prison at any given moment, designed to instill fear in the prisoners and keep them in check. Although it is physically impossible for a single guard to observe every single cell at once, the fact the inmates cannot know if they're being watched is exploited to make them behave as if they're being watched at all times. A design characterized by fear, which ironically is the exact inverse of Ashnod's ability in his Vollständig. Tatarforas encloses the surroundings and transmits fear through the optic nerves, placing Ashnod himself in the center. The inversion of the Panopticon for Ashnod's Vollständig is a commentary on how Ashnod himself is a victim of fear, as Byakuya pointedly remarks. Byakuya's arrival is absolutely essential to everything explored throughout the battle. The man who once served as the catalyst for Rukia's lack of individualism, destroying her bond with Renji and adopting her into a family that has no regard for her, now serves as the catalyst for Rukia's enlightenment. He turns his back and allows her to handle it all alone, disregarding Ashnod's mocking remarks as the idea of vengeance doesn't even begin to cross his mind. Fitting for a story that places so much weight on balance to have Rukia truly come into her own and gain that sense of individualism she always strove for by reveling in her kinship with others, empowered by Byakuya's words of affirmation. This is, by all means, Rukia's moment, and Byakuya's involvement only serves to strengthen that fact. After all, their relationship is central to both of their character arcs. To accompany the chapters of this deathmatch, the volume sketches present a snowflake slowly breaking apart over the course of the battle, a symbol of fragility withering away. Rukia has overcome the mental walls she was once subservient to. She has come into her own and risen to a position of authority. She has gained the power to protect her loved ones, enough power to dispel any of the fears within her. If the only thing Rukia fears is losing her loved ones, then what better way to overcome her fears than gaining the strength to protect them? Hakka no Togame is the peak of her evolution, a Bankai characterized by white, much like the noble family she is a part of. The Shinigami are immediately recognizable by their black shihakusho. After all, the original reason Kubo drew this manga was because he wanted to draw a story about death gods who wore black robes. But despite that black color scheme, the captains wear white cloaks to represent their authority, to enforce justice. Rukia, who was once a victim of the Kuchiki clan's purity and authority, now embodies that same white purity. she has become a true Kuchiki through her strengthened bond with Byakuya, and in many ways she has become a true Shinigami through her purity in service of life. Her simulation of death in the battle tells us that Rukia is prepared to sacrifice her life for the greater good. She has become the model Shinigami. The systems she existed within were shaken at their very core and reformed in a way that facilitates a sense of belonging within them for Rukia. Which is exactly why becoming a captain herself following the Blood War is the perfect conclusion for her character. Haka no Togame is a magnificent bankai, but it is also a difficult bankai. There is a fine line between being driven enough to protect by staking your own life and being self-destructive in that pursuit, which is addressed by Byakuya. Nothing can be protected by a blade that is swung at the cost of one's life. Komamura's fate is the proof in the pudding. Like Rukia, he achieved a state of death to overcome his adversary, but unlike Rukia, that was a permanent sacrifice. Kubo goes to great lengths to display both extremes, making his position on the matter clear through the conclusions of their respective battles. The former descends from their position of authority into a wolf that lacks any semblance of agency, and the latter ascends from complacent subservience to a position of assertiveness and authority of their own. If Rukia forming a circle with the ribbons of her zanpakuto is symbolic of the bubble she placed herself in, then the ribbons in her bankai looking like butterfly wings is symbolic of her bursting that same bubble. Butterflies represent metamorphosis and are commonly used as a symbol of enlightenment. Rukia has finally broken out of the cocoon she'd built around herself and achieved a state of mind that can be best described as truly enlightened.